welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming to us from. I hope folks are well and are staying warm. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the third installment of our Moving the Mission series, where we aim to continue the conversations around some of our most popular topics at our annual CVI conference. My name is Brittany Nieto, and I am the program manager at Giffords Center for Violence Intervention. Today, I'll be sharing some insights from the 2025 legislative session. I'll then shift to moderating our expert panel, all of whom are deeply involved in the policy and advocacy space and have had a hand in some of the legislative victories that I'll be highlighting for you all today. We know 2025 was a challenging year for the CVI field. Federal funding rollbacks, shifting political priorities, and growing uncertainty put real pressure on states and communities to decide whether and how to sustain these life-saving programs. Today is about taking stock of what happened in 2025, what it means for the CVI field, and where we go from here. So before I dive in, I just want to mention a few quick housekeeping notes. For starters, this webinar will be recorded and we plan to share it with you all. And also, while we won't have a formal Q&A session at the end, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we are going to try to answer them as we go. Oh, excuse me. So before I dive in, I just want to mention a few, or sorry, now that we've mentioned our few housekeeping items, we can go ahead and jump in. So each year, Giffords Center for Violence Intervention releases a legislative year in review to track how state-level community violence intervention policy is moving across the country. We're not just looking at what passes, but what gets introduced, stalled, vetoed, or carried forward, because that all tells us important information about policy trends. So our analysis is grounded in data from our CVI Policy Analysis and Tracking Hub, or CVI-PATH, where we provide monthly updates categorized across 7 distinct policy areas. Those include direct funding or appropriations to CVI efforts, expansions of Medicaid to reimburse for violence intervention and prevention services, workforce development programs that aim to train, certify, or offer wellness opportunities to frontline workers. We also track the development of new programs dedicated to CVI, the establishment of codification of offices of violence prevention, and new tax mechanisms that can help bring consistent funding to CVI programs regardless of state budget shortfalls or changes in leadership. This year's state legislative activity didn't happen in a vacuum. It unfolded alongside some major federal funding rollbacks that significantly altered the landscape for community-based public safety. In 2025, the Department of Justice eliminated or rescinded more than $800 million in public safety grants, including $150 million that had already been awarded to the CVI-PI program, or the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative, and to those grantees. These weren't abstract dollars. They were funds that organizations had fought for and planned around for staffing, programming, partnerships that were suddenly rolled back. For many communities, this created immediate gaps and forced difficult decisions about whether programs could continue at all. Against that backdrop, states were effectively faced with a choice: step in, stabilize, and sustain CVI efforts, or allow those gaps to widen. Even in that context, though, we saw a lot of meaningful state-level action last year. In 2025, we tracked 105 CVI-related bills across 27 states and Washington, D.C. That includes bills that were enacted, failed, vetoed, and legislation that's still pending. Because, as I mentioned, all of that tells us something about political will and political readiness. In total, the largest category we tracked was funding, where we saw 22 states appropriate more than $497 million to CVI efforts nationwide. 4 states created new CVI grant programs. 3 states codified or created offices of violence prevention or an equivalent, increasing the total number of states with such offices to 17. Michigan expanded Medicaid to cover violence prevention services, joining 10 other states that have passed this type of legislation. And one thing that really stood out to me, 14 tax bills were introduced to explore more sustainable funding streams. This comes after Colorado's successful passage of Proposition KK in 2024 and California's AB 28, which passed in 2023 and took effect this year. Both of these tax firearms and ammunition to help create a sustainable funding stream for violence prevention and intervention, something that we're hoping to see more of, especially as many of these bills are still working their way through the legislature. So just to put all those numbers in context for a moment, in 2017, just 5 states invested roughly $70 million. That's compared to $497 million last year in CVI. The scale we're seeing now shows just how far this field has come and reflects years of hard work and advocacy. I want to turn now to spotlight a few standout states that took meaningful steps in 2025. We saw progress in red states like Nebraska and Texas, who both appropriated funding towards CVI efforts. Michigan passed several bills to support CVI programs in the state, including expanding Medicaid, establishing a new grant program in the Department of Health, and dedicating over $15 million to violence intervention efforts. In Illinois, we wanted to recognize the efforts of government agencies and community organizations who came together to protect and provide resources for vulnerable residents in Chicago as a response to the federal crackdown on immigration. And in Washington, the state dedicated upwards of $28 million over 2 years to CVI, with a portion of those funds going to establish a training and certification program for frontline workers. That's a policy that's so important and we hope begins to gain more traction in more states. These aren't the only places that where progress happened, but they represent approaches states are using to support CVI across political and geographic contexts. And what matters most is the pattern. States are investing in infrastructure, workforce development, collaboration, and systems level integration in ways that reflect local needs. So, what does this mean for the field? When we step back and look at all this together, a few things become clear. Progress at the state level has continued despite significant federal setbacks. We're seeing more states engage with CVI policy year over year and growing bipartisan support, including in places that haven't historically invested in this work. And at the same time, this moment makes clear that states now carry even more responsibility to preserve, protect, and strengthen CVI efforts going forward. If you missed the QR code at the top and would like to dig deeper, we'll drop a link to the full report in the chat. But with that context, I would like to turn things over now to our panel. Each of our guests today has been deeply involved in advancing or implementing CVI policy in 2025, and I'm really grateful to be in conversation with you all. If you can go ahead and come on camera. Hi, everyone. So to kick us off, could each of you briefly introduce yourself and your organization and share one thing you learned last year supporting or implementing CVI policy over the past year? Anything that stayed with you or shifted how you think about the work? E, why don't we start with you?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Brittany. So I'm E. We had to change my name tag because our organization just changed their name from Alliance for Safety and Justice to Just Safe. I'm the director of policy on our Scaling Safety Initiative in 5 cities, which is in Tucson, Miami, Cleveland, Austin, and Jackson. Previously, I was with the Community-Based Public Safety Collective, providing training and technical assistance to CVI organizations around the country with my partner in peace, Akila. But my heart is always with the Newark Community Street Team, whereas the deputy director and the policy director. And I would say I would go back to that basement in the South Ward of Newark tomorrow if I could, because that is doing CVI work on the ground is absolutely everything. And my heart is always with my team, who I talk to every day, and they inform everything that I do policy wise. I just quickly want to say thanks to Giffords. I know my intro is going along, but I remembered I think it was 2018, I got a call from this guy and he was like, "Hey, there's this new law firm." And it was Mike McLively. And he said, "Can I help y'all? I know you're doing CVI, or we didn't call it that back then, but I know you're doing this work in Newark. Is there anything we can do to support?" So it's been great to rock with Giffords all these years. So I was told that I should bring my brand of realness to this webinar. And so I will be honest, it is really not a shift in how I have been thinking, but this last year has reminded me of our vulnerability. Just watching as a field, watching amazing organizations across the country, like NCST, like Circle of Brotherhood, like, the ATX peace folks, and like all over the country, right, lose their federal money. And then some folks not just lose their federal money, but they lost their state and local dollars too. That would certainly be the case with NCST and Circle of Brotherhood. I watched things like in New Jersey, we fought for years to have gunshot survivors be treated as crime victims and get the state to invest their VOCA dollars into serving Black and Brown survivors. And they took all this year, they took all the CVI organizations out of their VOCA Victims of Crime Act funding portfolio. This was just like a devastating blow to victim services providers around the state. So yeah, the year has just really reminded me of how vulnerable it is and how exhausting it is for folks who do the work and have to live with this uncertainty. And as policy folks, it's our job to do everything we can to support them and to help alleviate some of the exhaustion that they're experiencing. I'm complete. Sorry to go this long.
No worries, E. Thank you for bringing the realness. Zoe, would you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everybody doing? I'm Zoe, Executive Director of Force Detroit, also a co-founder of Emerging Leaders National Network. Um, One of the things that I learned this year or experienced this year was the emergence of leadership that has been being developed over the years. Me and my associates, and I would say my colleagues and friends, stepping to the forefront, um, executing what the pioneers of this field trained us to do. What all these can the conferences and all the academies and all the technical assistance and the training has led us directly from our communities to state capitals and actually to federal courtrooms. Um, I learned this year too, like everybody always says no one's coming to save you. I learned this year that when it's time to stand up, sometimes you got to stand up for yourself, um, and be willing to move forward. Yeah, and I learned that it is support out there, but we can do a way better job and be more intentional about how we collaborate and execute, especially since it's a sense of urgency in the field right now. All the work that has been done is at risk right now. So that's what I learned. As it relates to policy, mm, politicians they need mediation too.
Mhm.
Yeah, they need mediation too. So not picking sides, but being able to mediate conflict when it comes to both sides of the aisles and being able to negotiate progress.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Sean, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, y'all. My name is Sean Holihan. I direct the state efforts here at Giffords. So anywhere there is legislative policy or program funding that's being worked on, we try to be active in working with coalitions across the country. Additionally, I work with our federal team, reaching out to congressional members in competitive districts and with law enforcement, trying to get them to partner with us on policies and for funding CVI programs. One thing I definitely learned after the Trump administration came back into power, we saw a lot less policy being passed in the state level. But one thing we didn't see a slowdown in was the efforts on CVI funding. That was sort of like a silver lining of 2025. The policies we saw passed in 2023 and 24 were historic, were amazing, life-saving policies. But very few of those very impactful policies were able to be passed after the Trump administration. There just wasn't an appetite for it. We lost majorities in many of these states, like Michigan. Um, but there was still an appetite to work on CVI programs and funding and creating things like offices of gun violence prevention or expanding Medicaid. So that was, I think, an inspiration and a silver lining for me as I did this kind of work across the country.
Thank you all for sharing what you learned in the last year and for introducing yourselves. I'm very excited to be in conversation with you all. So, Sean, I want to stay with you for just a moment. And I know that you're deep in the fray in many states working with policymakers and advocates to help get legislation across the finish line. And I'm wondering, from an advocacy and state policy perspective, can you talk a bit about how the political landscape changed last year? Where did you see progress or momentum, and what strategies or conditions helped to make that possible?
I mean, ironically, we saw progress in places like Florida and Texas, first time funding programs like this. And that has just taken years of work on educating folks, partnering with people on the ground and getting them into the room with policymakers. A lot of legislators across this country still do not know what CVI is and why it's so important and impactful. And so being able to work behind the scenes and connecting with some of these legislators, even in conservative states, and getting them to see that this isn't a political win for anybody. This is about policy. This is about saving lives. This is about helping people in their community. That has taken a bit of time to get folks up to speed on. You know, in places like Illinois, New York, New Jersey, California, legislators are expected to know this. And if you ask what CVI is, you clearly haven't been paying attention. But in some other states and communities, they really are just still finding out about what this is. And so I think we did have to pivot from our policy wins in 2023 and 24 because we didn't have the legislative majorities in some of our states anymore. Places like Minnesota and Michigan, we lost a veto-proof majority in Vermont. You know, we lost seats in places we didn't expect to. And so we saw a lot of our gun safety champions perhaps a little less willing to work on this policy, and a lot of states were dealing with a funding loss as well, their own deficits. Um, but still, as I said before, the thing that really stuck with me was that they were willing to work on CVI policy. They still thought it was a very important thing for them to work on. And for those who haven't worked on appropriations in states across the country previous to working on CVI, working on a budget is one of the hardest things you can do, both federally or in the state. There are so many different programs that have been in existence in a state for years, and those folks come back every single year, hat in hand, asking budget appropriators for a budget amendment or the governor's office. And CVI is a new policy recently for many, many people. So you're coming to them and you're saying, look, this policy is very important. I need to cut in line from these other folks, or at least get somewhere close to the front of the line. And that is generally very, very difficult to do. And yet, what we're seeing is historic funding still being allocated. So for me, there's a lot of promise. No matter what happens on the federal or state level politically, there is still an appetite and room for CVI funding to be done from blue states to red states.
No, I appreciate you sharing that context, Sean. And it sounds it's so interesting that like in this really challenging political climate, some of the states that we saw the most progress in were areas that you wouldn't think, like you said, like Florida and Texas, Nebraska, like I mentioned earlier. Um, so when it comes to you know, Sean mentioned the importance of education and that a lot of places still don't fully understand this work. So I'm wondering, what do you, I'm wondering, how are you helping communities navigate this more uncertain landscape? How are they educating? How are you working to help them educate these legislatures? And in addition to that, given all the challenges that CVI faced this year, have you shifted your approach at all to advocating for CVI policy?
Mm. A couple things, Brittany. First of all, I feel like that was a little bit different than the question that I thought I was getting. So, give me a second. But also, I just want to name that we are burning through our time here, and so, folks, I'd love to have some interaction. Like, if people have questions or comments, like, please use the chat. Yeah, I feel like it's just like a lot of us talking. So would love to hear from because I see these folks on here. I know half of them. These are like incredible policymakers in their own right. Okay, so I feel like the place to start, like, I just want to acknowledge I'm not currently working on state advocacy and state budgets. I'm really working on local level work, and except for in New Jersey where I work with NCST and we work on some state policies. So state policy is not my jam at the moment. It has been. And I've always been really concerned, even when we had the federal money. I felt like so many of the real CVI organizations weren't getting it, right? Like this is not, yeah, like a lot of the folks really on the ground, they weren't able to access federal dollars, period. Like it was, they weren't ready for it when the money came available. So, like, those are the folks, they, first of all, they lived with this uncertainty forever. And I've always thought, and at the collective, we felt this way. And that those are the folks we need to like really, if we want to reduce homicides and shootings in this country, we have to, we could never lose focus on getting those organizations that were not able to tap into public dollars of any kind to be able to access money and support their work. So like they've always been top of mind, and I'm devastated about the loss of federal money, but it's like we have always been working on multiple strategies, I think. So I like to think about building organizations' capacity to access and manage public dollars, but I also like to think about making funding more accessible, which requires a lot of work. And when I am working on that locally in the communities where I work on, where I'm working, it is not sexy. It's very tedious, and it requires a lot of work, but it's really like tackling reimbursement policies, like why CVI money should not be given on a purely reimbursement basis. That just knocks out half of the or more than half of the organizations. Is an agency, and this is something that our state level folks need to be thinking, folks who are working on state policy need to be thinking about, is an agency qualified and capable of administering public dollars, right? Some agencies are terrible at it, and they are and we're certainly battling this in New Jersey, inhospitable environments for CVI organizations to receive their dollars. And so I think it's a really important moment to look at like what we do have available on the state and local level. Is it benefiting the field, or do we need to make these, again, kind of more boring adjustments, like advocating for them to change? I'll just give you an example. Like I'm working in a city, they only do reimbursement basis. And I've asked, we finally, like, we're like, why? Why is it? Oh, it was in a statute. They said there was no statute that dictated that, right? That it was just practice. And so now we're, getting them to change that policy. And I think for CVI organizations, it's like, it is very often the devil's in the details. And like, as sort of state or federal advocacy folks, we can have like grand ideas, but we really need to be able to be sure that the field is informing it, and then it's actually going to benefit the field and not just like give us a win that we can claim, but not really get to the communities. So I would, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, Brittany, was there parts of your question that you wanted me to go back and address?
Well, I think you addressed a lot, and I think brought up some really important issues. Like you mentioned that a lot of these pots of funding or programs like can still be pretty inaccessible for community-based organizations. And I think maybe I would just be curious, like, what strategies or what has worked in terms of helping adjust those funding streams or those programs to help them be more accessible to community-based organizations.
Yeah, I mean, just the ones that popped to my head is like in one state, not to be named, we've looked at moving the administering agency from one state agency to another because they're not they're not administering the dollars in a way that we can work with, the CVI can work with. And yeah, I think like locally, give you an example of like really challenging like reimbursement policies or timesheet policies. Oh my goodness, these little things are what are used to trip up CVI orgs. Like the way timesheets are submitted, you could lose your whole grant reimbursement by some like archaic time shit. Okay, Jen's weighing in. I love this. Okay, thank you. So yeah, those are just two that popped to mind. Like, did we put this money in the right agency in the first place? And are there practices in administering the dollars that we can either internally get them to change or legislatively get them to change? And then also I'm working in the cities on, I can't remember if I said this. I apologize. I was up studying till all hours of the night last night. But we are working on doing budget advocacy trainings so that CVI organizations, like Sean was just talking about the budget process. So CVI orgs can understand it themselves and not be dependent on others to help them navigate it. I think this is a little bit what Zoe was talking about that, like really stepping into CVI being able to do their own advocacy work. So yeah, training on what the city, and the city, county, and state budget processes look like, and like everything from a timeline to the nuts and bolts of how you get your money, teaching people how to capitalize on all those political relationships that they have, right? Like elected officials love to say they support you, but like transitioning that support into actually funding your work. So those are the kind of things I'm thinking about as we deal with this huge loss in federal funding.
No, I appreciate that, Ian. And yeah, with a lot of these funding streams, the devil really is in the details and figuring out, yeah, if they're even appropriate for what we're trying to fund here. So, um, next, Zoe, I want to get you in here. I know that Force Detroit was really deeply impacted by federal cuts last year, and in fact, your organization is the lead plaintiff on the lawsuit that's challenging those cuts. And is also just a major player on the policy front in Michigan. So I was wondering if you can share a bit about some of the challenges that Force Detroit navigated last year. How do you anticipate the legislative victories in Michigan might impact your work? And are there still gaps that you're looking to address to sustain the work?
Yeah, one, we were already, or I was already being conditioned under our founder, Larry Harvey Quinn's leadership to be prepared for the upper cliff. So we were already organizing for local power and state power and coalition building. We were already trained in organizing, and we knew that, um, for community violence intervention to survive, we had to um, show that it is a essential part of public safety. So we were intentional about changing language in the public safety trust fund legislation, and we pushed that for like 2 years. Um, as it relates to the terminations came at the beginning of the year. We were hearing them. Amber Goodwin, Community Violence Legal Network, reached out, and I was excited about having something and being able to challenge um, the, I would say, an assault and an attack on community, and to have a vehicle to be able to challenge that in a way that wasn't just um, voicing my opinion or saying something, like it was something that we actually could do. One of the things I wish would have happened with that on our first, something that was challenging for me as a person, as a man in this field, and as a person that come from being a volunteer, was that first court date. It should have been a lot of us in front of that courthouse because it was for the field. It's not just a lead plaintiff thing. This is a movement, and it should have been some synergy and movement towards that courthouse. I just have to say that. Um, but legislatively, we pushed a bill. There was a lot of conflict going on up there in the state capitol with the House and the Senate. There was a lot going on with the mayoral election. People were thinking that we were controlled by our mayor. And we had to go out and be strategic and organize the rest of the state to show up. During our advocacy days, we did three in a row, 3 years straight. We had to show up with different CVI organizations, different advocacy organizations, to show that it wasn't just a Detroit thing, because that was one of the things that was going on up in the state capitol. You had people with different constituents feeling like this wasn't an issue of theirs, and it was an issue that was just going to impact Detroit more than it was going to impact other cities across the state. Um, We used our funding too. I think oftentimes CVI organizations, uh, because we come from an organizing background, I think oftentimes they don't know how to organize their um their influence or their relationships because they're so busy delivering the direct services. So we were able to have a program, our CVI program, deliver the direct service. Why we do the organizing and the advocacy. And doing that organizing and advocacy, while our brothers and sisters' head was down in the work, we had an aerial view and we could aim for something that would sustain that. Like right now, we're putting out two bills right now to codify the state office and get funding in perpetuity like we originally meant to do. And we have 3 years of funding to do that now, even after they took 3 years of funding. And we also got over 60 million to the state because we got the bills passed for the public safety trust, which 25% of that goes to cities with higher rates of violence. Few ways that we done that. We focused on a few things. We focused on the decision makers. So we knew to pay attention to the mayor's office and whoever is in that leadership position of authority as it relates to appointments and budgets. We knew that it was a mayoral election going on as well. We knew how to engage city council and how to use community during committee hearings. So we organized certain parts of the community. We knew that we had to have relationships with elected officials on both sides of the aisle, in the Senate and in the House. And there was a lot to do that. And it wasn't all knocking on doors, going to offices. We knew we had to use some of our funding to be at policy conferences, to spend time, do the things that, like, you come in somebody's office, it's very, very formal, drop the paper off, have this. But if you sit and eat with somebody or you spend a weekend with someone, you realize that some of us have the same um, morals, values, and intentions, probably just not understanding what's the goal. Also, when it comes to the implementation, we understood the implementation and how to leverage our influence as well. So we use CVI organizations, CVI practitioners. We use HVIP practitioners. We use school principals and students. We use our law enforcement. We have built a relationship with our police chief and the commanders across. Like, we knew that if we advocate, they're going to try to tear CVI down. So we had to get champions on every level. So we may look at ourselves as credible messengers, but we're not credible messengers for law enforcement. So get a credible messenger for law enforcement. So get a credible messenger for the House. Get a credible messenger for the Senate. Get a credible messenger for Republicans. Get a credible messenger for Democrats. And we also use that moral compass with our directly impacted residents. So we had a strategy. We had a strategy, and we had a strategy even when it came to funding. We made sure that our funding went to certain things, that we would have some flexibility, and we made sure we stood on integrity as well so that the funders know that we were in the fight. When our funding was stripped and terminated, I would be remiss if I didn't extend gratitude, because when we went up for that, we thought that everybody was going to run away from us. We thought that everybody was going to run away from us. I had to talk to the community, the board, and the staff, because we could have lost more funding, we were thinking, because not only were CVI organizations being attacked, foundations were being threatened, right? One in particular, Ford Foundation. You actually seen J.D. Vance threaten that this current administration threaten these foundations. So we made a decision, and in that decision, we got support as well. And we did what we were supposed to do with the funding. We did what we were supposed to do with our relationships. We did what we were supposed to do with our influence. And we did what we were supposed to do with our time. Just like now. Yes, we had legislative wins. last year, but those legislative wins just position us this year to codify our state office and go back up for funding in perpetuity until CVI is a permanent fixture in public safety and recognized just like fire, dispatch, EMS, law enforcement, and is funded properly. It it isn't safe. And I will add one more thing. When we did the public safety trust, strategically, we seen a few things. As we started looking at budgets, we started saying, where can we put CVI? So we were able to get CVI inside of schools. We were able to get inside the school aid budget, $10 million. And we seen something else with the Public Safety Trust Fund that we could also strategically probably pull funds from the police department without it being any conflict, just by creating some form of co-response model. And that co-response model doesn't have to be anything that's driven by law enforcement. It could be simply responding to shooting notifications, what you're supposed to do anyway. So it was a lot of things, and we had to be innovative. Um, it was a lot of things at hand. It was a lot of things that could be done. We had to be strategic, but like I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our leader and I didn't acknowledge the national support that we had as well. We had support from funders. I mentioned like one funder, Annie Casey, that traditionally did not fund, they didn't fund our advocacy, but us being able to do things on the ground and execute, we were able to show senators, look, we have a safe house. When somebody's home gets shot up, we don't put them in a hotel. We put them in a fully furnished house with food. Can't let them stay past 30 days through squatter laws. But we make sure intake is done. We have all that stuff. And we were able to show them a side of this trauma-informed public health approach towards violence, not just focusing on like the term high risk at times is off-putting for people who don't understand it. So when we learned that we got to bring senators and state reps down to our cities. We can't just go up in the rooms. You got to meet people where they're at. And you got to make people come meet you where you're at. So that was a few of our strategies, and it proved to be effective. So effective that we still have elected officials up there right now waiting for us to introduce more and want to collaborate. I think what went on in Michigan is shocked and impressed me because I've seen everybody working collectively to push some legislation through and some policy through.
Thanks so much for sharing that. So I agree with the sentiment in the chat there. It's just a masterclass in advocacy, and I really appreciated how you got into the weeds of all the different spaces that you've worked to engage to help champion this work for you in various legislative spaces. Um, and I also just wanted to lift up one question from the chat real quick, which you mentioned a few policy goals for 2026. You mentioned establishing state funding in perpetuity and codifying the Office of Violence Prevention. I was wondering if you could share where are you all anticipating to draw funding for funding in perpetuity? Is that from the general fund? Are you creating a new funding mechanism? Do you have any more information on that?
Yeah, we plan on getting it out of the sales tax. No different than law enforcement. We've proven that this is not experiment, this is not charity, it works. We have support. We work very, very hard on establishing relationships and metrics to actually legitimize the work. Yeah, and we believe like nationally, and this is one of the things, being a co-founder of Emerging Leaders, that we're committed to doing across the country and helping people. To show that and to implement this, every city, state, and county should have an office. Every city, state, and county should have a codified office. It should be there. And it should be funded, just like every other part of public safety. And I think my goal, we sit with young men, young women, family members, or whatever, who have inflicted serious injury and harm on one another. And we're all about prevention, intervention, community transformation. Um, so that's what we aim to do with individuals who are about advancing the field. Our goal in Michigan, and as we establish ourselves more across the nation, is to make community violence intervention a permanent part of public safety. Um, and this is just part of it. I'm doing it. We're doing it in our city. We're doing it in our state. We started a statewide Michigan CVI coalition so that they could not divide us and say that Detroit, Detroit, Detroit. We share information. We share our metric system. And when I say we, I'm talking about my city. I'm just representing my city right now. We all work together collectively. I think we're going to have a win. And strategically, we're prepared to fight. So just like we knew ARPA was going to run out, we got a 3-year window to advocate hard along with all of the groups that's receiving funding. So our goal is to organize the state to do some intense advocacy so that we get this stuff passed and that we can be a beacon or an example of what to do and how to do it, along with others across the country.
Thanks. So, because you were able to share a few of your policy priorities for 2026, E and Sean, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you, and I'm just curious, what are opportunities that you all see in 2026 in your respective work? And we can go ahead and start with Sean, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I think one thing that's happening right now is Virginia, with Abigail Spanberger and expanded Democratic majorities in the House. Democrats have a real shot of expanding on a lot of policies that we have failed on because of the former governor vetoing so many pieces of policy. Things like Delegate Sia Price, she has a bill to create the first ever Center for Violence Intervention and Prevention. We've been working on this for the past 3 years, and the former governor unfortunately vetoed that bill. We're also working on CVI funding, of course, to fund all these programs. Really proud that Giffords has been such a partner with coalitions in that state and helping to connect them with policymakers so that we're not leading on that issue, but we are helping them get in those same rooms with the governor's office, with legislative leaders so that their policies can be heard straight from those community leaders. So Virginia is really the biggest state right now because of those those wins. But we're also looking at other places for that long-term funding. Places like in Chicago, I know there's a lot of work being done on either rifle and excise tax in other states. So with Medicaid shortfall looming, there is a big fight in a lot of these states to try to find that expanded that long-term funding.
Yeah, Brittany, the only state, again, that I'm doing statewide work is with the NJVIP coalition that Jordan helps lead in New Jersey. And I think we're about to develop our policy goals for the year, but I think we're really focused on improving the administration of what we already have. Our coalition members, the CVI organizations we're really struggling with the implementation of these programs that we fought really hard to get into state law. An example would be the community crisis response team that is like great in in theory, but the organizations haven't even gotten their dollars yet. There's a parallel 988 system with we're not getting any support with actually getting connected to the 911 dispatch. So like a lot of devil in the details that I think we're really gonna be focusing on in 2026. Also just like around the timing of funding. I mean, So anybody who knows this works knows it's really hard to operate a team when you're constantly fighting to get your money and your grant contract is delayed and you are waiting for reimbursement and stuff. So I think in New Jersey, that's going to be a lot of our focus for 26. We already got the dedicated state funding source. It's just not going as smoothly as we would like. In the cities where I'm working around the country, again, not doing state level advocacy in those places, but really working on solidifying recognition of CVI, getting folks in community that I think the other panelists talked about to understand what CVI is, also what it isn't. And focusing OVPs on actually violence intervention. I think a lot of us are seeing that too in the field, that it's like we're seeing some mission drift in some of these offices that we get set up, or that they're like, funding positive youth development, which is amazing, but it's not CVI, right? And making sure that the dollars that we have fought for are actually focused on CVI that intervenes in violence. And then last but not least, just like so inspired by everything Zoe was saying, because my passion is building the advocacy skills of the practitioners, right? And cultivating emerging leaders. And so we'll be working on that in all the cities that I'm working on. And just another, like, Zoe, thank you so much for sharing that. It was just like so inspiring to hear. And that's the love. I mean, when Newark Community Street Team, very early when we developed a policy, we weren't going to have a policy agenda. We asked folks what they wanted, right? And what they wanted was victim comp reform. And they didn't want, it was like, that was their priority, victim comp reform. They were crystal clear on it. And I was like, so we worked on victim comp reform and, had shooters and survivors, when sometimes they were both, testifying for a bill that they had helped craft, and it changed the game in the state. Like, we were actually able to do emergency relocations afterwards. I mean, it's not perfect, but man, they did it all themselves, and that is the transformative work. So any funders out there, like, CVI needs to be able to do their own advocacy, because these are the folks who could change the world.
Now, thank you everybody for sharing. I personally think it's really inspiring and exciting to hear about all of your plans for 2026. It feels like CVI is moving into sort of a new era. Yeah, like, yes, it's still, we need funding, but it's also about the implementation. How are those dollars getting to the ground? How are we institutionalizing this work through offices of violence prevention and other means? So it's really exciting to hear everyone's plans for the coming year, and where we're headed. For our last question here, this is for everyone, but for E and Sean, what advice do you have for folks who aren't in advocacy or policy, that are seeking to move legislation? And so, what advice do you have for folks who aren't on the ground and are looking to support this work through policy and advocacy? Why don't we start with E?
So Brittany, just so folks who are not in the CVI world, how they can work on.
Yeah, folks who aren't on the ground, who are part of a community-based organization, maybe from more of a policy advocacy perspective, how do you think that they can support this work?
Yeah, so I swear it's not because they're on this call, because I have seen their names in the chat. But I just like to shout out the Moms Demand Action of New Jersey, and also the National Council of Jewish Women in New Jersey, who have, at Newark Community Street Team, we have a biweekly public safety roundtable where a lot of the policy goals percolate. And the folks from these two organizations, women, have showed up with humility and just been listening, and are like, okay, like, you tell us. And we've had the opposite experience where folks have come in and been like, hey, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z for you. And it's not what we want. It's not what the team want. It's not what the CVI orgs want. So showing up, yeah, with that humility and that listening and like, one of the in the South Ward in Newark, one of the prior policy priorities that's bubbled up is around crossing guard policy. In New Jersey, you cannot be a crossing guard if you have had any justice and injustice involvement, and that includes a juvenile record, right? And folks are really like they care deeply about this. It's you might say it's not directly CVI related, but like those organizations that I mentioned, they weighed in support of our efforts to change this bill, and that is like how I think folks can do is like listen, hear what's affecting people's lives, and support instead of dictating.
So for those who want to get more involved, who possibly don't have relationships, I think Zoe outlined a perfect example of how to do this. Um, it's really trying to do a power map of who are those people who could be most effective. The person who carried the Public Safety Trust Fund bill, for instance, in Michigan, was the perfect person to get it across the finish line in a year when Republicans took over. He's sort of like a moderate Democrat. He represents Detroit, but he represents some suburbs. He has a good relationship with law enforcement. And when he first proposed the bill, there was no CVI money in it. And, we came to him and we said, that's not acceptable. We'll get Democrats to stand opposed to this if you don't get CVI involved. And, thankfully he eventually listened. But what Force Detroit has done, and what other organizations like Chicago Cred, for instance, who I know who are on this call, they do a really fantastic job of understanding who those power players are. If they're on appropriations committees or finance committees, they're in leadership. But if you have anyone in your region who sits on any of those committees, you're in luck. You have someone who can be your advocate on those, smaller committees who decide where the money goes. And if you're able to connect with those folks, they will be your champion. And so finding a champion who will be in those small rooms is really the way to go. And Force Detroit has figured out a way to do that.
Want to thank all of you. Appreciate the support and the acknowledgments as well. To the question, what advice do I have for folks who are? Let me make sure I'm reading this right. As folks who aren't on the ground that want to support through advocacy and policy. Go talk to the folks on the ground. And when you go talk to the folks on the ground, like we started out as an organizing and advocacy organization. So we started out talking to individuals. I just so happened to get out of prison. And when I got out of prison, everything that I was learning, everything that the sister Leia was teaching me, I was able to implement it in my community. So I have both of those experiences. But I would say partnerships, composition. I think this field is very siloed and it has to stop because it's going to be at its own detriment. So if you are an advocacy organization that's pushing policy, especially if you're pushing policy that is going to greatly impact someone's future for better or for worse, it's kind of almost offensive if you're not having those regular conversations with them. And if you're not teaching them how to do it themselves, they should be a part of the process. When you don't share the strategy, when you don't walk people through the strategy, when you don't educate people on the strategy, you keep bringing plates and you don't want to show nobody how to fish. That means you want people to keep coming to you asking for food. And it is no threat of losing anything. And I will also say, like, keep pushing policy too. You get one pass, push another one. Keep pushing because this system, excuse my language, is fucked up. So I would say keep pushing it and make sure you're going to the ground and that you're educating them on the political process as it relates to legislation, not just state, but local. city ordinance, all that stuff matters. And I think oftentimes we try to stop bills instead of writing them and drafting them. So work together with those on the ground, those who are practitioners. Work with the researchers, right? Work with the organizers. I think one thing that this field has been, in my opinion, there's been a deficit is using the ability and the expertise of organizers who specifically organize around CVI and partner and pairing those with those advocacy organizations. So I would say the work is about relationships. So it should be relationships there in all phases of the work. So you pushing policy, have some relationship or some proximity to the front line and the practitioners, and try to get a practitioner in position to push policy as well. I'll also say this to the CVI organizations. If you are a premier CVI organization in your city or in your state, and you have some in your budget to get a lobbyist, pay for a lobbyist. Like, use your money right. You know, everything is in direct service. You have to sustain what you're doing. So invest in your future by making sure that you sustain it. It has to be sustainable. Um, I'll say, as a former lobbyist, I'm just not catching that. Yeah, invest in the future of community violence intervention and it being a permanent fixture in public safety. And in order to do that, you got to have somebody up there at all times representing your work.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panel for sharing your time, your insights, and experiences today. And also thank you to everyone who joined us. We will be sharing a recording and additional resources shortly. We're grateful to the advocates, practitioners, and community leaders who continue to move this work forward, even in challenging moments. Thanks again for being with us, and we look forward to staying in conversation with you all.